Even your quiet becomes thunder to your adversaries when God is your strategist. You went through flames like it was a red carpet and emerged without smelling of smoke for a purpose. You weren't just fortunate. You weren't only intelligent. You had more than just a nice heart, too. Let's face it, this was not a personality competition. It was spiritual warfare. Fact. Researchers have shown that the human heart does, in fact, create an electromagnetic field that is detectable up to 3 feet away. Your spirit, however, sends shock waves into rooms you haven't even been in yet when you are selected. That's divine backup, not biology. And let us just refer to it as such. You were walking as though heaven had already made the way clear, not as though you were expecting for a miracle. You were out there gathering receipts from wars you were never intended to win, but nonetheless managed to do, so while others waited for a sign. They referred to it as arrogance. They said that you were too composed under duress. They made fun of your apparent lack of concern. In the meantime, you were engaged in a WWE-style battle with spiritual giants in the shower. They were aware, however, that you were acting as though you had divine security clearance. This film delves deeply into the unvarnished, soul-stirring truth of why the chosen ones don't move like the others. Not the flimsy gods watching over you, nonsense that is plastered on coffee mugs. Because your journey isn't haphazard when you carry light from the actual royal room. So, if you still do that, get your water, journal, shot, and sage. Let's talk about why you acted as though you understood that God was not only observing you, but was actively supporting you. Let's go on. First of all, you weren't following your gut. You were carrying out heavenly directives disguised as instincts. The majority of people believe that intuition is only gut instinct, a form of emotional guessing. For you, however, instincts were never the only factor. It wasn't a spontaneous impulse to turn left instead of right, to quit that job, to end that relationship, or to speak out when things got tense. They were heavenly directives disguised as instincts. You didn't even need to completely comprehend the encrypted signals you were getting from a higher source in order to act upon them. You simply knew. That's what sets you apart. You weren't just using reasoning. You could proceed without a 5-year plan. When the atmosphere changed, you moved. Before evidence, you reacted to energy. You moved in peace. And for you, that was sufficient evidence. But for everyone else, proof was required. What the outside world perceived as impulsive, careless, or unstable was actually a spiritual download that went directly to your bones without going through your brain. Before the result even made sense, you were carrying out divine strategy. You were never out here making rash decisions. Because of this, you could abandon everything without a plan and still manage to get back on your feet. You were being redirected, not falling. There was weight behind every choice you made while following that kind of guidance. You were being led. You were never guessing. What's the most absurd aspect? You gave the impression that it was simple. You couldn't explain yourself all the time, so you didn't. No blueprint was present. Before reality ever caught up, you had a gut feeling that told you what you had to do. You were untouchable in rooms where people were still attempting to read the handbook because of it. The manual was you. You received spiritual instruction in addition to being perceptive. You were in tune, not fortunate. Number 2, you didn't simply take chances. Every time you listened, it was evidence that the divine wasn't only observing your movements, it was flowing through you. Under the garb of recklessness, you made prophetic leaps. They said you didn't think things through. You acted too quickly, and you were too impulsive. They were unaware, however, that your alleged recklessness was a reaction to heavenly timing rather than human reason. You were answering calls that only you could hear, so you weren't simply taking chances. And such calls were made with urgency rather than justifications. You knew deep down that something greater than yourself was already in action. So you didn't hesitate when it came time to move. People shook their heads when they saw your options. Without a safety net, how could you quit that job? How could you call it quits on a relationship that seemed ideal? When everything appeared to be stable, why would you begin something new? It was crazy to them. However, your goal was to keep in sync, not to make sense. You were pursuing a divine path that was beyond intricate for simple comprehension. Since your steps were never meant to be safe, they didn't appear to be. They were calculated departures from structures that, had you remained, would have stifled your purpose. And each time you took one of those chances, it appeared to them like a gamble. But it was obedience, not a gamble. You weren't only holding out hope. Rather, you were acting as though you already knew how things would turn out. You weren't walking alone. Therefore, there was no dread in your steps. Before you, the divine had already paved the way for routes that had not yet been constructed. Because of this, everything always seems to come together at the last minute. It was alignment, not luck. In actuality, most individuals have no idea what it's like to walk with that level of spiritual assurance. Since they have never walked on water without sinking, they refer to it as dangerous. You've done it more times than you can remember, though. You're supported, not because you're courageous. You acted with foresight rather than merely taking chances. Number 3. You made survival appear effortless because they were blind to the magical hold that kept you afloat through torment. This is why every leap you made wasn't a fall, but rather a flight. Many individuals were perplexed by your portrayal of survival as being far too simple. They saw your smile. They witnessed your arrival, your actions, your kindness, and your stability. They failed to see what it was like to crawl in the dark without anyone applauding. They didn't witness the silent evenings you wept or the mornings you woke up feeling completely exhausted, yet still managed to get things done. They were unable to hear the emotional turmoil, spiritual burden, or mental struggles you were juggling while still bearing the burdens of others. You were being carried, not simply surviving. There were times when you were so broken that you were unable to pray effectively. Nevertheless, you managed to make it. That was supernatural intervention wearing your face, not strength. People believed you were in control. They thought you had a different build. They were unaware that something invisible was keeping you together. Your survival was due to superhuman grasp, not just willpower. It was the appearance of elegance like armor when your defenses were all gone. You were being pulled out of circumstances that should have destroyed you by the hand of someone greater. Some individuals couldn't manage even one chapter of your narrative. They would go crazy if they had to go through even a week of what you went through for years. However, you persisted because the supernatural wouldn't let you fall, not because you had the means. Because you didn't flaunt your injuries, people didn't realize how much you were going through. Although you didn't talk about the suffering, it wasn't fake. It just meant you weren't going through it alone. Although your narrative appears to be clean on the surface, it is rife with survival elements that nobody anticipated. The fact that you didn't only survive for yourself is the most potent aspect. You turned into a blueprint. You prove that when God is on your side, the same thing that should have destroyed you really strengthens you. The fourth is that your suffering wasn't arbitrary. You didn't just get through. You made it indefensible. It was a spiritual warfare training regimen that was coded. Your suffering wasn't the result of a string of unlucky incidents. Bad decisions, bad timing, or terrible luck weren't to blame. It was a deliberate, focused process designed to develop your soul in ways that comfort could never. None of it was accidental. Not the betrayals, the losses, the loneliness, the times you doubted your value and your sanity. They weren't merely unpleasant chapters. They were precisely timed, encrypted lectures designed to raise you to a degree of spiritual awareness that was unavailable to you in any other manner. Every betrayal? It was a test of your judgment, your limits, and your self-respect. It wasn't simply someone being unfaithful. Heaven let some of your loved ones to teach you how to see clearly in the spirit, rather than to shatter you. Because you never again confuse charm for character after being betrayed by someone you trusted. Even before someone says a word, you can feel their energy. That's spiritual refinement, not paranoia. And it wasn't weakness that you had to sit in quiet. It was a spiritual recalibration, not a sign of weakness or fear. Silencing the cacophony around you so you could hear your own frequency at last was nirvana. It was heavenly seclusion, not rejection, when no one was calling, when you weren't invited, when you were left out, ignored and misinterpreted. Your spiritual weapons were being polished at that time. Your degree of discernment increased at that point. At that point, you began to recognize rather than react. Because suffering taught you things that calm could not, you learned how to fight without moving, how to communicate via quiet, and how to change the mood just by entering a room. Furthermore, you are now strategic rather than soft. You know things. You don't simply feel them. You can read spirits as well as circumstances. You notice trends before they become issues. You're ready. You're not overly cautious. Actually, it was your initiation that nearly ruined you. You were being constructed for battle, not for comfort. You weren't being broken. Not only were you injured, but you were also being prepared for holy war. Number 5. They believed you were ignoring them because you were following orders to withdraw from low-frequency combat. You were chilly, they remarked. You changed, they remarked. They said you were acting like a brand new person. They failed to see, however, that you were simply obeying and not ignoring anyone. You didn't disengage out of avoidance, pride, or pettiness. Exit now was an internal order from a higher authority, and you obeyed, even if it made you appear to be the bad guy. You outgrew situations that required you to turn down your lights in order to maintain harmony. You didn't ghost people. When the truth wasn't welcome, you left the conversation. Not because you were being dramatic, but because your energy was being taken without regard. You left dynamics that were draining you all the time. The low vibrational, the manipulating, and the insecure had found a home in your presence. You were engaged in a quiet struggle, not a relationship. And once you saw it, you realized that continuing was self-destruction rather than spirituality. You refused to continue validating people who only came to life when you were being attacked. But you didn't reject anybody. You observed how your suffering turned into amusement, how your weakness turned into a weapon, how your victories made them oddly silent, and how your hardships turned into oddly encouraging. That is spiritual parasitism, not assistance. And when the Almighty revealed the truth to you, it was clear and uncontested. Leave now. You began to see how your spirit was responding to particular people. Tense, apprehensive, and worn out. That was your soul alerting you to danger. Not you being too sensitive. You were obeying heavenly commands to withdraw from relationships that were camouflaged as warfare. Not being impolite when you stopped returning those calls or showing up. Some tried to get close to you without showing you any respect. When you were uncertain of your power, they liked you more. But the dynamic shifted as soon as you woke up. You become a menace instead of their reflection. You changed, they remarked. You didn't. You've just come to the realization that spiritual warfare frequently takes the form of love and isn't always audible. And instead of acting, you opted for peace. Number 6. Your delays were a cover for heavenly rerouting. You weren't neglecting anyone. You were safeguarding your task. Other people appeared to be going on to new careers, relationships, significant victories, and higher levels. You were in a season that seemed like quicksand in the meanwhile. You tried everything, but doors would not open. There were opportunities that you missed. You rushed, pushed, and prayed, but nothing changed. It seemed as though you were failing, and that something was amiss. However, it was protection disguised as delay rather than failure. Your stalled season was divine rerouting, not stagnation. You were being preserved rather than punished. Heaven was keeping you from breaking down when you were doubting your value. You had no idea that you would have been the target of sabotage for the chance you were lamenting about missing. You were unaware that your calling would have been depleted by the connection you were mourning. Heaven could see the storm coming, but you couldn't. Additionally, even as you begged to proceed, it delayed your movements rather than allowing you to sprint directly into destruction. You weren't lazy, which is why the delay was so perplexing. You were not ineligible. Simply put, you were being protected from something that was still invisible to your eyes. The others were applauding their fast forward. However, some of them were racing into traps which they were unaware of. A few of them were going into spaces for which they were not spiritually ready. You were being prepared, not rejected, and you were aware of the change when it was time to move at last. The vibe shifted. Once difficult, it became easy. Suddenly, what had been obstructed opened. You then understood that it was always about divine alignment and never about delay. You were exactly on heaven's schedule, not late. You were protected, which is why you moved like that. Your sluggish season wasn't a punishment. Rather, it was a heavenly holding pattern that prevented you from coming into contact with anything that might have tainted your mission. You thus learned to respect divine time while others applauded for speed. Number 7. You were never lost. Now that the door has been opened, you're entering covered rather than bewildered. You were concealed. Not for a moment were you lost. In your heart, you knew who you were, even if the outside world didn't. It was just invisible to the public. They ignored you, went right by you, and thought you were just another quiet person trying to figure things out. However, they were unaware of the strategic nature of your invisibility. You were concealed, not forgotten. A kind of darkness that appeared to be rejection, but was actually protection, was wrapped about you by heaven. You were being kept out of rooms that weren't prepared for what you carried, not excluded from any rooms. There is a distinction. You weren't passive by being silent. You didn't fail to rise because you weren't in the spotlight. It was a heavenly arrangement to protect your strength as it developed. You would have been a target before you were completely armored if you had been exposed too soon. Rather, you were put in the background, observing, learning, and developing. People thought you were confused because you were silent. They believed you lacked a strategy, a vision, and a purpose. However you did, it was simply holy. It wasn't yet time. Heaven had to hide your vision because it was so weighty, shielding you from jealousy, sabotage, and untimely attacks. Before you had a chance to shine, others would have attempted to dull you, because your unveiling would shake too much, too soon. Rather than because you were unworthy, heaven temporarily stopped your radiance. You have always been the system disruptor silently watching, the soul with age-old knowledge in a trend-obsessed society. The storm concealed below a placid exterior. It wasn't that you didn't show up. Rather, it was the divine preventing a deluge until the soil was strong enough to withstand it. And the revelation is almost here. The change is taking place. It was your sacredness that made you invisible, not your diminutive size. Number 8. You didn't just leave poisonous settings. Heaven only hides a chosen one, because their presence will have a profound effect that will last for centuries. With your departure, you destroyed whole demonic buildings. You appeared to be exhausted and irritated as you left. People believed that you were being too sensitive or emotional. They believed that you just couldn't play the game, handle pressure, or accept criticism. They were unaware, however, that your departure was prophetic rather than personal. You were being drawn out to bring down systems that couldn't function without your light, not merely to rescue yourself. You brought heavenly order in addition to your presence. Like a shadow, stability followed you into turmoil. Peace clung like armor to your vitality. Your spirit anchored places even while you were silent. Just simply being there, you prevented storms. However, poisonous environments don't value such authority. They take advantage of it. They deplete it. They use your goodness as a weapon and label it a weakness. Therefore, all that depended on your unsaid shielding began to come apart when heaven gave the signal and you left. It grew cooler in some houses. A few teams began to fight. The phony harmony in some partnerships vanished. It was a spiritual void being revealed, not drama. They had no idea that you were the glue, the evil that felt at ease pretending to be around you, the hidden dysfunctions, and the fake tranquility all suddenly had to come out. The truth came to the surface because of your absence. What appeared to be a silent departure turned out to be divine destruction. You didn't yell. Bridges weren't burned by you. You didn't plead to be heard. You simply departed. And fortresses began to crumble when you did. Their preferred source of energy was taken away from manipulators. The atmosphere was no longer under the control of controllers. It was no longer possible for environments that relied on your quiet to survive to conceal their illness. You were the room's spiritual fulcrum, and never merely a part of it. Additionally, everything that you were supporting spiritually became disorganized when you left. Number 9. People thought you were strange because their demons recognized your anointing before their minds could comprehend you. That wasn't a coincidence. It was heaven pulling you out like a keystone from a false temple because the entire thing needed to collapse, and your obedience made that collapse possible. It wasn't only that you were frequently referred to as weird, as if it were a derogatory term. In actuality, though, it was their devils responding before their minds could catch up. You upset an entire invisible battlefield, not just one particular area. The vibe you carried, something unadulterated, sacred, and unabashedly real, was what made them uncomfortable, not what you said or did. Without doing anything, you entered rooms and changed the moods. It was spiritual disturbance, not magic. Their spirits saw the danger before their minds did, and they weren't just insulted or critical. You were a bright light revealing areas they want to conceal, a live opposition to their gloom. In your presence, their own buried scars, worries, and insecurities squirmed uneasily. There was no need for you to attempt. They had been concealing their inner turmoil behind layers of facade for years, and just being you was enough to awaken their long-buried shadows. Your genuineness exposed their deceit, which is why they responded so strongly. Their flaws were highlighted by your strength. Their turmoil was disrupted by your calm. In ways that rationality could not account for, you upended their comfort zones when you arrived. They called you strange, challenging, or excessive because of this. It was about what you made them face within themselves, not about you. Your anointing was a living cause for spiritual shaking, not merely a blessing. You were too lively for anybody to try to push back, quiet you, or confine you, because your spirit was in harmony with a force that was beyond common comprehension. You moved in a different way. Number 10. You were created to realign the system, not to be absorbed by it, so you never fit in. Their response wasn't personal. Rather, it was a sign that you were precisely where you needed to be, right in the center of the spiritual battle zones you were intended to disturb. You were never supposed to fit in, which is why you never do. The system was never designed for someone like you, with all its cozy routines and unquestioned assumptions. You weren't made to follow the crowd or accept things as they are. You were destined to realign it and upend the assumptions that everyone else took for granted. You always felt like a puzzle piece thrown into the incorrect box because of this. It was the system's opposition to your existence, not a weakness in you. Spiritual complacency is directly threatened by your own being. You're built differently than most people, who are content with superficial facts and simple solutions. You possess codes, divine programming, deep inside that reveal concealed deceptions, illusions, and falsehoods. These protocols are about disclosing, not just knowing. They dispel the cozy delusions that keep people sleeping, trapped, or perplexed. Because you are revealing the ignorance, fear, and conformity that the system relies on to maintain its hold on power. You pose a threat to it. Since your task is not to blend in or remain silent, you move differently. You are here to confront, to disrupt, to disturb. Because of this, some people find your energy intense, while others find it unpleasant. You're not content to play little or pretend. When anything is wrong, you don't tolerate quiet or partial truths. Even just having you around is a catalyst for transformation, a spark that ignites long docile areas. You were meant to be a live reset button and a force for realignment, not to be safe or invisible. Therefore, keep in mind that the next time you feel like you don't belong, it's because you belong somewhere novel and groundbreaking. Number 11. You didn't recover alone. You're designed to stand out, not blend in. Under divine surgery, you recovered without the need of anesthetic. You had heavenly surgery without anesthetic. You didn't recover in a comfortable place with consoling words or easy solutions. Rewriting the code of your soul required every cut, stitch, every searing moment. For you, what others jokingly refer to as healing was nothing less than a rebirth. A thorough breakdown and regeneration at the most profound level. The kind of suffering that left you bleeding in silence, as the very essence of who you are is being rewritten, was not only physical or emotional. It was spiritual and transformative. This was not a gentle procedure. Soft landings and the luxury of leisure were not part of it. Even though you didn't comprehend what you needed, divine hands understood precisely what you needed and took you down, exposed you, and rebuilt you piece by piece. Since numbing the discomfort would have numbed the growth, anesthetic was not used. To push you past your previous boundaries and get you ready for a frequency so high that mankind isn't even ready to receive it now. The rawness was necessary. Because of this, the person you have become no longer fits within your history. Old acquaintances, relatives, and circumstances that formerly shaped your reality seem to have lost sight of the healed version of you. Because they have only ever seen the shattered version of you, they are unable to recognize your power, your tranquility, or the blazing light you now bear. However, what they saw was essential. You underwent a significant metamorphosis that altered your energy signature, mentality, and spiritual DNA. You're completely different, not just better. For you, healing was a rebirth into a new dimension of life, rather than a stride forward. Additionally, it's normal for previous connections to seem strange since this new self vibrates on a higher plane. You can't be followed there. You're on a journey that requires bravery, isolation, and an unwavering belief in what only heaven can see. Number 12. They attempted to curse you, but the curses failed because your lineage was already marked as indestructible. The stillness you maintained during that bleeding was your refuge, your holy place where your soul was reborn for a mission too great for the world to comprehend. They believed they could destroy you, so they poured all the curses, whispers, and sinister rituals at them. However, they were unaware that your lineage was not only fortunate, it was stamped as indestructible from the beginning. This was a holy edict that no curse could undo, a spiritual pact made long before you breathed your first breath. It wasn't luck or happenstance, because the foundation underneath you was constructed by divine hands and sealed with power that would not break. Their attempts to undermine you were certain to fail. Nothing that was divinely protected could be touched by a hex, poisonous rumors, or perverted ritual. What they intended to be weapons turned into mirrors that reflected their own helplessness. Every attack they fired failed, stuttering against an invisible firewall that the divine had put in place, rather than weakening you. In addition to preventing damage, this firewall converted their hostility into fuel, converting what was intended to destroy you into an engine that would help you go forward more quickly and powerfully. This is beyond the comprehension of your adversaries. They thought that spiritual combat was about losing and causing harm. However, they were unaware that transcendence was important to you. They redirected, transformed, and magnified every negative energy they delivered in order to hasten your development, enlightenment, and ascent. The curses returned as strength rather than suffering. Vitality was created by digesting the poison. Your light was only made stronger by their attempts to extinguish it. This indestructible logo makes a statement in addition to providing protection. It asserts that your soul is impenetrable, your journey is unstoppable, and your destiny cannot be changed. You fight with armor that rituals cannot erode, gossip cannot tarnish, and curses cannot pierce. Number 13. You did not only survive the setups, you transformed them into spiritual receipts. You ascend above spiritual attacks, propelled by a heavenly contract that ensures your triumph even before the battle starts. You transformed every one of the traps into indisputable spiritual rewards, not merely surviving them. Not only were those instances of betrayal, false accusations, and attempts to discredit you unpleasant, but they were also pieces of evidence being entered into a holy ledger. Heaven was silently collecting evidence while you were suffering, painstakingly filing case after case that no human court could ever hear. This was about divine justice in action, not about getting even. Every falsehood spread against you and every ruse to ruin your life was meticulously recorded. Your suffering wasn't pointless or arbitrary. Rather, it was an essential component in creating a spiritual library that unequivocally confirms your reality. These spiritual receipts are genuine. This is not only a metaphor. They are powerful, authoritative, and heavy. The moment has arrived for those data to unlock doors that your adversaries hoped would remain closed forever. Because they are unaware of the degree of accountability that is already awaiting them in invisible tribunals, those who attempted to destroy you are surprised. The precise proof that ensures your vindication was the result of their failed attempts to suppress you. You move on with the assurance of someone whose truth has been recorded in an indestructible book. These receipts are the keys to your upcoming season, not simply recollections. Each false charge was a brick in the foundation of your breakthrough. Every betrayal was a step toward revealing darkness. Not only did you survive, but you surrounded yourself with an unquestionable fortress of truth. And now, that stronghold is poised to topple any effort to change your story. Your best evidence comes from your adversary's weakest weapons. Number 14. You walked like someone supported by the supernatural because, deep down, you knew who you were before the world attempted to make you forget it. Heaven is holding the ultimate decision. You moved like though you had a strong, unwavering bond with something far greater than yourself, not simply faith. This was spiritual memory, a type of knowledge so old and ingrained that no one could ever take it away from you, no matter how hard they tried. It had nothing to do with pretending to be strong or confident for the sake of the world. Your spirit was silently humming with wisdom that had been passed down from before time began, while the majority of people were fumbling, perplexed, and winging their way through life. You seemed to be carrying an inner soundtrack that was played in a language that other people couldn't comprehend. That's why others around you thought your path was crazy. They viewed your actions as careless, your choices as dangerous, and your faith as unguided. However, you weren't out here attempting to prove anything to anybody. You were just dancing to a beat that came from a place where time, fear, and doubt didn't exist. This beat was playing far beyond the sounds of this world. Your own self has always been there, anxiously awaiting your recall. Confusion, anguish, and diversion were all attempts by the world to obliterate that memory. But they were never successful. You never lost sight of your true identity. An everlasting soul on a heavenly mission with a heritage so potent that it was impossible to ignore. Deep down, you moved steadily toward a destiny that others couldn't see or comprehend, since your actions, decisions, and even silences were in line with that recollection. You were traveling with a goal, supported by a power that defies reason, rather than getting lost or aimlessly. No matter how crazy the tempest was around you, you had a spiritual compass that pointed true north, an ancient knowledge that helped you navigate the maelstrom. You were unstoppable because of that. Chosen ones, nothing you went through, not even the hurt, betrayals, or secret struggles, was pointless or random. It was a heavenly design that put you in the right spot and shaped you into the unstoppable force you are today. A holy choreography composed by a power far above the norm. You turned the storms into the fundamental source of your power, not merely a way to get through them. All along, you were going with a heavenly conviction that comes only from knowing who you really are. Even though the world may have misinterpreted your path, called your light odd, or written off your actions as irresponsible, your existence is not a coincidence. Rather, it is a proclamation and a tangible example of the universe's invisible powers totally supporting you. This is about claiming the profound, unbreakable fact that you were created to disturb, realign, and reconstruct on a level that most people can't even fathom. It's not about pride or ego. Codes that break falsehoods, expose hidden darkness, and forge new routes where none seemed imaginable are carried inside your entire being. Your delays weren't failures. Rather, they were providential pauses that set you up for innovations that will upend systems and change the course of history. You were reborn by divine fire, permanently changed and elevated to frequencies the world isn't prepared for. You didn't recover in silence. Unbreakable spiritual covenants protect your very lineage, transforming attacks into accelerators and curses into catalysts. A supernatural ledger that now stands ready to unlock doors and bring justice that no human court can touch has the records of every false charge and treachery. So now, as you stand on the brink of everything you were meant to become, know this: your tale is anything but ordinary. As you navigated it all, you carried an old spiritual memory, a rhythm from worlds beyond this one, that guided every step with unflinching confidence. You are not here to play tiny or blend in. You are here to upend established structures, break through complacency, and spark change. Not only is the supernatural keeping an eye on you, but it is also responsible for every action you do, decision you make, and triumph you declare. The world is waiting for you to fully reveal the force you were destined to be. So walk with courage while holding on to that fact. Now is your moment. If you found this message inspiring and are prepared to embrace the power of your actual purpose, be sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of the more profound insights that are on the horizon. If you think these words are powerful, please hit the like button and leave a comment below. Your voice counts here, so share your opinions or your tale. Share this with others. Additionally, share this video with people who should hear it. You are the driving force behind our movement, and together we are creating a community of indomitable spirits. Remain alert, keep connected, and never forget that you are never alone on this journey. May you be blessed.